Okay, now we come to the last week of Jesus' life in the Gospel of John. Uh, this week is contained in John chapters 12 through 21. Within the Gospel of John, John has given us information that a lot of the other writers don't have, so it's very enjoyable. But when I read through this, I sort of see a man on a mission. Uh, John chapter 12, verses 24 and 25, Jesus is saying that a grain of wheat, whenever you see it by itself, it's not much, but when it dies, all of a sudden it becomes something greater. And he says, if you love your life, in this life you're going to lose it, but whoever hates his life in this world will gain eternal life. And Jesus is on this mission that he's going to give his life. He's going to lose it for the rest of the world. He says in verse 37, if I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself. And that was his goal. His goal was not to judge the world, he's going to say in John chapter 12, but he is going to lay down the standard by which we will be judged. He says, the words that I've spoken will judge you in the last day. In John chapter 13, it shows that he knows his purpose. I love verses 1 through 4, that he knows that he's come from the Father and he's going back to the Father, and that's why he's able to give the best sermon you can ever be able to be a part of. He takes action. He puts on that towel, he girds himself, and he serves his apostles by washing their feet. And he says, you see what I've done? You go and do the exact same thing. And then we start to see what he wants from his followers. He wants us to serve one another. But then these are the three words that I really picked out as I was reading through it. The first word that I see a lot is peace. John chapter 14, verse 27, he says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you, not as the world gives do I give you. Don't let your hearts be troubled or be fearful. John 16:33, these things I've spoken to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you may have tribulation, but take courage. I've overcome the world. Jesus wants his followers to have peace. I then see the word joy. John 15, verse 11, I want your joy. I've done these things so your joy may be full. John 16:21, he says right now he's trying to prepare his apostles. You're going to sort of like be a woman who's in labor. She's going through all this pain right now, but as soon as the child comes, she forgets the pain because of the joy that she has. He's preparing them. You're about to experience great grief, but the joy that is coming, remember that God is going to bring great joy as you get through this. He says in verse John 16:24, and then in verse 26, he says, rejoice, and nobody's going to be able to take this joy away from you. He talks about the idea of ask, and you'll receive, so that your joy may be full. John 17:23, I speak in the world so that they may have joy in themselves. So what does Jesus want his followers to have? Peace and joy. And he's telling them that in this last night where all he could have been talking about all the bad things that are about to happen, and he's going to be honest with them about those. But in the midst of the crisis, in the midst of the hardship they're facing, he says, my disciples have peace and they have joy. But what's he going to talk about the most? Love. I read the word love 46 times this morning because that's what Jesus is about. He says, a new commandment I have for you, that you love one another. A new commandment. He's been saying that all along. He's almost pointing out to them that I want you to love each other, but I'm just taking this to a whole new level of love. Greater love has no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. I want you to love each other like I have loved you, and that's going to point out to their life what's important. He's also going to tell them, by this, all men will know that you're my disciples because of how you love one another. So he's going to talk to them and show them and say, look, what you're about to see is a picture of love. One other word that comes up many times in conjunction with love is commandments. 12 times Jesus in this last day is going to talk about commandments. And what does he say? If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. He who has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and will disclose myself to him. Verse 31 again in chapter 14, I will set the example. He says, I love the Father, and that's why I'm about to do his command. When it comes to love, it's care for one another. When it comes to love for God, it's you're going to do what he says. So what's our final thought? My final thought came from the last chapter as Jesus sits there with Peter and asks him, do you love me? 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? Peter starts to get upset, obviously, because he denied Jesus 3 times. But I asked myself the question, and I ask you today as well, what if Jesus came and he asked you, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Would you become uneasy? Would you start to say, I don't know, maybe I need to think about this deeper? Looking in context of what he's talked about, do you have peace and joy? Because that's what followers of Jesus who have a relationship and love him, that's what he wants you to have. Those are indicators of your relationship. If you're missing peace and you're missing joy, there may be, I would say there's something missing in your relationship with Jesus. Do you love other people? John's later going to say, you can't love God, who you can't see, if you're unwilling to love man, who you can see. You can't love Jesus if you don't love others. Finally, I would say, are you obeying his commandments? Because what does he say? If you love me, you're obeying his commandments. Sort of a challenge for me this morning as I analyze my life in line of what Jesus has said. I know it's a little bit long, but I hope that it's been a blessing to you. Have a great day.